Oh, you mean you put the stuff away finally?
I put a lot of the stuff away, yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
I cleared the floor. That's a big deal,
actually.
Yeah. It's away. It's not unpacked, some of it.
Well, I mean, there's some order to it, at least.
There's order to it.
Yeah.
And it looks like nice now. Nicer than it did before.
I have to say, though, as far as just like stuff to be lying around a room, it was like a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and like interesting stuff and like good books and like some records and shit like that. So wasn't, you know what I mean? Like I could actually, it's like living in an antique shop, kind of. It's not that bad.
He found my fidget dreidel.
Yeah.
Found very funny.
All right.
Spinning that fidget dreidel when we record here.
Oh, good. I'm sure Willis Carto would love that.
Yes. We would love that the person that's doing this episode has a fidget dreidel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And welcome to The Empire Never Ended with Boris and Fritz, because Ray is just taking it easy today.
Yes, Ray is unfortunately not able to join us today. I don't know if that's actually unfortunate for him, because anytime you get to sit out some of these assholes, it's probably a good thing for your mental and physical health.
Dude, we're recording this early. By the time it's released, Fritz will be deep on vacation, like completely fucking Aperol spritzed out of his mind by the time you're hearing this one.
That's true, and Boris will be on a very particular assignment that I'm getting more and more excited about as it approaches.
It's kind of hard to believe it's real sometimes.
Oh my God, I saw more about it today. I was reading. I'm very, very excited. I'll drop a hint that...
Okay, good. I was wondering how long you want to like tease this for the poor audience.
Something that is depicted in the Kyrgyz flag, the national flag of Kyrgyzstan, will be there in its largest form.
Okay.
That's
all right.
A little riddle there, or not even a riddle. It's a little, whatever. I'm very excited for it, though. I think it's going to be insane. And hopefully there will be, we'll definitely have at least one episode about that assignment and possibly even a video account of that particular adventure. So
I would take some food reviews too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I assume there's a lot of cauldrons of things going around. So
possibly, yeah. Maybe some exotic animals too.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. I'm very excited.
All right. Well, can't wait for that. But
sadly, so yeah, for Ray, he gets to sit it out. I gotta say, last week's free ep, the so-called mid-arc roundup, so-called because it's never actually the mid-arc.
But it's always necessary, nonetheless.
Yeah. I mentioned that we'd be getting into the life and times of a certain fellow named Willis Carto and his many failed projects and side quests. And, it's hard to compare Carto to a lot of the other guys that we've talked about, because on the one hand, he is super important. So we're going to spend... it seems like more than one episode on just him. On the other hand, compared to a lot of these freaks, he's so dull and just this.
I get the sense that he kind of failed and fumbled his way to success. You know what I mean? Like he's a failed up kind of guy.
I think he has like the personality of some sort of like squishy Nazi Twinkie or something. Just like this kind of just the whitest of white, kind of cowardly douchebag Nazis out there. Like,
people did not like him. I mean, that's well established.
People did not like him. Yeah. His projects tended to fail for a reason, and that's...
I'm looking at him now.
Largely, I think because of him personally. Although there are people that, still think he's the greatest. And, although he left this mortal coil in 2015,
a long time.
He had decades of activity and managed to somehow be connected to like everyone. So
right.
So like from Otto Skorzeny, Savitri Devi, George Lincoln Walkwell, Francis Parker Yockey, the Birchers, Lyndon LaRouche, Revelo Palindrome Oliver, William Luther Pierce, David Duke, Bo Gritz, John Wayne, Strom Thurmond, Thomas Edison, Tom Metzger, George Wallace, the band Rahowa, American Duganists of some weird varieties, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. The list goes on and on and on.
Sorry. Okay, what was the last one?
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. You remember him, the Axis of Evil.
But yeah, I remember him, but why is he on that list?
Well, through the connections through the Holocaust denial, like the Institute for Historical Review, and it's the
it's just like you listed like a ton of weird Nazis, and then
him. Although I mean, like I could have listed some others as well. I mean, this is just like a short kind of list of just names that came to my head right before we did this episode.
A long ass short list.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the list goes on and on. I guess we're missing, for some sort of weird 10 hat trick. We're missing like some sort of explicit Worcestershire connection.
Oh, right.
Although I'm thinking maybe through guys like Tom Sunich, maybe, I guess if you want to call him a neo-Worcestershire of some kind, or apologist, maybe even through the World Muslim Congress, in which they had a relation with too, on the basis of Holocaust denial. Maybe they, for example, read Jafet Kulanovich's works, or I like to imagine that somehow Carto met Muftich at some point. I feel like they would get along on multiple points. But we're also insane.
Our hoped for Muftich lore is just vast and ever expanding.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we've brought Muftich into any kind of prominence through our show, because he's really an obscure historical figure, and he deserved more.
Yes.
He did so much.
Yeah, so much weird shit. That's right.
Yeah, totally. And, Carto's, like I said,
this is his time, right? We're talking about the 50s now, 56, 78. 50s, like, this is peak 50s, Muftich time.
60s, 70s. Yeah, this is peak Muftich time for sure.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some connection, because they did have relatively early contact with the World Muslim Congress, and that would make sense with people like Muftich. Well, I mean, Kulanovich was also there as well, but that's again, it's a stretch. It's something that I'm going to look into out of personal interest, because I'm insane.
But I wonder if the CIA thing might separate them, because Muftich was already gainfully employed, and I don't know about Carto, but like Revelo didn't like the CIA at all.
Yeah. I don't think Carto particularly did either. In fact, I know he didn't really. But,
okay.
But that's the thing. Like, Muftich ran in circles. I mean, he also worked for everyone. So, like, know,
this is where everybody's a Venn diagram with like 100 other circles inside of it. It's all too packed together.
And I'm, that you might be also giving Carto too much of the benefit of the doubt for being able to spot a Fed. With most Nazis, like, it doesn't happen. Come to them quite easily.
Look,
and they accuse people who aren't Feds of being Feds.
Of course.
When they have a problem with them. I mean, a typical kind of problem, yeah.
But also they accuse the Feds of being secret Jews or whatever, or communists, or both. So, I mean,
exactly.
It goes all the way around. But I suppose, like, honestly, though, he should know better. Anybody who's nice to him and says that they like him, he should know that they're some kind of
And for them, it's not always the Feds, too. They were deeply paranoid about the Anti-Defamation League.
Sure.
Because, they ran the long campaign against Carto. And, they saw them as, like, kind of, even they are controlling aspects of the government because, obviously the Jews, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
But, this is, like, the interesting thing about Carto is that, like, unlike a lot of kind of the heavy hitters that we talk about on the show, he tended to work kind of in the background. He didn't really particularly want to be in the limelight too much ever, even though he maintained like a pretty like fanatical level of control over some of the organizations that he ran.
Well, right, he's got a good face for radio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for using pseudonyms and the like. So yeah. I mean, he lacked the showmanship kind of and charisma that you need to be like one of these many Führers that we've talked about, and people that have, he's no Rockwell, he's no, whoever else out of the many kind of crazy Nazi mini Führers.
Yeah, but
we've talked about over the years.
That's maybe, you could tell us, but maybe that's ultimately why some of his contributions to this whole horrible scene have lasted the longest.
Yeah. It's ironically, it's a double-edged sword for him, because he does maintain a level of control that destroys organizations. But since he, never did the whole like uniforms, Rockwell thing, even when he ran an organization into the ground or lost control of it, which frequently happens with him, he could just pick up and do something else. And that kind of is his MO for his entire career, which spans, basically from the early 50s until his death in 2015. So it's a long ass time.
Really?
And, his supporters and great friends of his admit that, he also never was really, he didn't really contributed much to, what passes for theory in these circles too.
Okay.
He did write a lot, but he was never particularly known for his, some groundbreaking theories or whatever, or even for having any kind of articulated kind of movement of his own, other than trying to kind of funnel things into some sort of more mainstream direction. And we'll get to what I mean by that in a minute, because basically what he seemed to be best at, what he was most skilled at, was networking.
Okay, I was going to say he's starting to sound more like a campaign manager than the candidate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. He was good at finding a lot of different thinkers and politicians or people in the movement from all over the place, and like not just the US too, internationally as well, and like communicating with them and bringing them together, publishing them, republishing them, even things that are kind of contradict one another. He liked to kind of put them all in the same place. So he had this always kind of maintain this ultimate hope of like uniting them all, and sometimes would get burnt out on it and switch his ideology in certain kind of minute ways, but never
make little adjustments. But
never ever like kind of wholeheartedly rejecting some of his previous ideas or failures. So you see a lot of like contradictory stuff, even in like the long life of the Liberty Lobby, right? Which Liberty Lobby is kind of his main baby, and that lasted from, let's say, the mid 50s, late 50s until 2001. When it went bankrupt.
Fucking crazy.
And all these lawsuits and stuff we'll probably talk about in the next episode. But like there's a lot of contradictory shit there, because, Liberty Lobby starts with a very different kind of ideological platform that it ends in, but never really explaining how it gets there along the way. But
I think I kind of know what you mean. A lot of these papers that come out of the scene that we've sort of been building up now in the arc at this moment, they have these, they shape shift a little over time in order to stay alive, and they go on for a very long time. So it's true that if you picked up even, I'm trying to think of stuff that came out of like William Luther Pierce's opus, but if you pick up some late career stuff and then flip it back to what he was talking about in the 60s, you'd understand the structure, but the language would change in order to accommodate the latest anxieties. Is that kind of the vibe here?
Yeah.
Like,
and there is kind of one constant, like, I'd say like ideological inspiration for Carto that we'll talk about a little bit later that kind of lasts throughout his life.
Okay.
but the language changes, and he does make these kind of small changes as time goes on. But like I said, he's good at networking. He's good at like meeting people and bringing them together. Even though, as we know from this show, they're basically, he's trying to herd together some of the biggest morons and psychos
Right.
on the planet. I mean, this is not. It's very difficult to bring a lot of these types of people together. And
so
you get these really
too?
predictable results of trying to, put these guys in the same paper in the same room or whatever.
Well, if it wasn't for all the horrible parts, I guess it'd be a comedy, which is.
Well, I mean, he's like the living embodiment of the expression "you can't polish a turd."
There we go.
But he keeps he does it he keeps trying anyway for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah. This is a time. Let me try to think about how I want to phrase this. Okay, so this is very squarely in this moment that we've been talking about in the arc that strikes me as a kind of a global movement that a lot of people are undertaking all at the same time to reconstitute fascism after the war in some form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So like there's this going on in the US. There's like CIA shit going on with like trying to bring people over in the late 40s, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Cold War politics abound here, but this is that moment. There's this drive to put back together, I think.
Right, which is exactly why I did the last episode as a mid-arc and kind of talking about Liberty Lobby through that, because this is because he had such a long career and because of all the, even the brief list of people that I mentioned that he was connected to in some way or another, it really is the most important bridge, I think, from like the pre-war to what we like understand as the kind of modern movement, and in all of its forms, right? Including like, the skinheads and, the people like David Lane, The Order, to, groups like the John Birch Society. It's really all of it's there.
Yes.
And, if you were to kind of try to describe what his motivation was, I think, throughout his career, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, I would kind of say he was always trying to slap a kind of Midwestern middle class respectability politics to like Nazis and like the Klan in a period of time in which that kind of thing was becoming less and less acceptable in polite society. And there's a good quote by him in his biography written by George Michael, not that George Michael.
Too bad.
Called Willis Carto and the Far Right. That's one of the books I use for this. The other one's Liberty Lobby and the American Right, and then some of Carto's books of his own. But that's more for next episode. And this is talking about his parents. Okay. It gives you kind of an idea for his motivation. I think it's a good place to start. To make sense of
no, please. Yeah, if there's one thing I've learned on this show, it's that this all starts early.
Right.
For most of these the weirdest of our freaks. Yeah.
My dad and my mother, you couldn't find anyone more typically American. Dad was a Chamber of Commerce type guy, salt of the earth type. And yet I know that beneath the surface he saw what was going on, but he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to recognize it. The last thing he wanted to do was admit I was right. He died about 10 years ago, 1993. He knew what I was doing, but never discussed it. People like Dad, millions of guys like him in their country clubs and private gatherings playing bridge or whatever, they talk about things. It's so obvious the Jews are taking over, but the last thing they want to do is get involved.
Okay.
So you see what I mean about like this constant need to slap this Midwestern, like middle class or upper middle class respectability onto this. So basically, you know, his entire career can be summed up into like, Dad, why don't you understand Spengler and Yaki, Dad? If only you read Why the West is Declining, you'd understand, Dad.
But isn't there also, that's true. That's actually how I hear his voice as well. I have to say, I was surprised to hear it come out of your mouth as well. But there's also a tactical decision being made here too, which is to use sort of the same resources that like, I don't know, like Reagan would use eventually, you know, the idea of the, what do they like to be called? The the silent majority.
Silent majority,
right? This is kind of the vibe that if that country club clan, for instance, really did rise, you'd have all the political power in the world.
Yeah. And this is like really one of the earliest articulations of that, right? I mean, because this is exactly, along with the Birchers, when you start getting, these kind of dissatisfied right-wingers that are trying to lobby within the U.S. government. So like no longer like I'm not including shit like the Klan here, which was part of like the traditional power structure. Right. It's like going into this post-war era and like kind of dissatisfaction with this kind of American imperialist neoconservatism that they're against and trying to resurrect like the America First isolationist type stuff, but for in like a modern context. And it really seems desperate at times, I gotta say. This is why I kind of characterize him as like this, cowardly Twinkie, because he really seems like the kind of guy, like you get this impression that throughout his career, he doesn't want to be associated with like the violent bad elements, right? Like that's not what Dad and his country club types would like, right? Oh
my God, is he John Kramer from the movie we just watched? Is that more him?
Exactly. He is kind of actually.
Okay. Just to explain for free listeners what we're talking about, we just on our Patreon covered a Roger Corman film from 1962 starring William Shatner, which was called Intruder. Mm-hmm. And it was based on John Casper from the National States Rights Party, John Casper's propaganda efforts in Clinton, Tennessee during 1956 during integration. And so we just watched that, and essentially in the film they give us a version of John Casper which is less terroristic, less violent, more of a dupe, more trying to sort of use the normal people of this town to sort of inject his vitriol into it and get them to become a proper political council. And of course, it gets out of his hand in the film. This very much strikes me like Willis Carto more than it does John Casper.
Absolutely, because Carto seems like the kind of guy, and like I think their accounts of this are true, that like he's very nice to say like black people. At the same time, he is friends with people like J.B. Stone, or like supporting people like J.B. Stoner, the National States Rights Party, John Casper. These are all people that,
horrible, violent, terrible,
the most violent, terrible Klansmen and Nazis and stuff like that. So this is all who he actually supports. But like, his public facing persona obviously doesn't reflect that. And that's, part of this whole like respectability gig that he tries to play, but obviously it runs into all these problems. But
it's a weird group too. It's a weird group. It's where Revelo is too. It's where It's that these guys they usually have some sort of institutional background, or they come from like a good family in some like traditional way, and they're just fucking crazy.
Absolutely. So let's, I guess, do a quick little bio on him. So
please, yes.
Willis Allison Carto.
Allison?
Allison Carto. Willis Allison Carto.
I see how he became a fascist.
Yeah, he's a junior, actually. His dad is also Willis Carto. Although he didn't have junior in his name. He's Willis Allison Carto.
He's whack.
Apparently of some sort of Huguenot French descent or whatever.
Sure.
Was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 1926. According to his biography, like I said, that I read, his childhood is pretty uneventful and normal for the time. Like that quote that I read, his parents are like, regular Americans, not particularly, super political or whatever.
Sure.
He said that like the rest of his family were Democrats. Dad was a Republican or whatever. He recalls listening to Coughlin on the radio as a kid. But not much beyond that. Like in his own political development, he was apolitical for quite some time. He graduated high school in 1944, which is just in time to get drafted and serve in the army in the Pacific Theater at the end of World War II. And it was when he was in the Philippines that he got shot in the shoulder. He was wounded in battle with the Japanese.
Okay.
And then, this is the very end of the war. So he actually, I think, spent the rest of his time in the army in the occupation forces in Japan. So he did see
interesting
a little combat, enough to, get wounded, but not a whole ton. And apparently,
did he stay on at all after the war? I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
A little bit, but he was honorably discharged. He left the army after his stint in the occupation forces.
Okay.
I guess there is some indication that his experience in the army didn't make him too keen on war, which I think you kind of go one way or the other. And one thing you can say about Liberty Lobby is, with the exception of Vietnam, and we'll talk about that, they were pretty consistently anti-interventionist and kind of true to their isolationist principles in that respect.
Well, what was their position on the Korean War?
I think they were against the Korean War. Yeah, they were against the Korean War.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, Liberty Lobby didn't exist yet when the Korean War was on.
In the overall fight against communism, I suppose I was asking up to that point.
Yeah, let's get there, because that's going to happen pretty soon. So he leaves the army with the rank of corporal. Obviously, he was wounded, so he had a Purple Heart. He was given some other medal as well. But, rather unremarkable career in the army. He said that at the time he believed the propaganda about the war, and only later would kind of wake up to the true nature of what happened there, which hint, the Jews started World War II and World War I and whatever, everything else.
He found himself some Ford, some Yaki.
Yeah.
Got a little wacky.
Oh, yeah. So after the army, he tries to do the whole college thing, first enrolling in pre-law in Ohio, somewhere at some university, drops out, tries to go to law school, also drops out.
Very upper middle class kind of pathway he's trying to walk.
Yeah, and then, decides to kind of explore America by becoming a traveling salesman.
Okay.
And it's in these travels, according, to his own story, that he started to become more politically aware. And by this, I mean that he discovered, for example, that Black people are, quote, content to live in slums.
God.
Because, they just don't think like me and you. They have a different mentality, outlook on things. And
of course.
There's a reason why things are the way they are. And it's, it's clearly their own fault because they, whatever. So this is, I guess, where it starts for him.
I'm gonna guess his research methods were less than scientific there.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why he's not exactly the greatest thinker they ever had.
Well, this is why he had to call together the greatest thinkers, later on.
Yeah, because he wants other people to tell him why, his initial thoughts that Black people love to live in poverty is.
Why is this real?
Yeah. But I mean, this is the most basic type of racist formula, right?
Of course.
It's like when, Europeans are well, of course, Roma people,
it's the same.
Their mentality is like that. They can't integrate in society. They have to live. Everything you give them turns to shit and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Everybody personally knows a story, the same story about whatever wiring getting pulled out.
Wiring getting pulled out of the apartments that they're given. Yeah. I mean, his whole thing too is then analyzing how white people, paid too much into the welfare of Blacks who did nothing with it and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we got that plenty on this show. In fact, if you're American at all, you've heard someone say this kind of shit to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is his great political awakening, is just becoming a normal racist.
Yes.
Where the anti-Semitism comes from is, I think, less established. But again, that's not... I guess too big of a leap for just some regular honky racist from fucking Fort Wayne, Indiana, to also suddenly think that Jews were controlling everything.
Especially, a law school dropout, a guy that again, frustrated that he couldn't quite make his expectations of his station. assumes there's some conspiracy.
Right.
You get it. We all get it. He's a very special boy.
Yeah. So, then he finishes his career traveling. His traveling salesman stint ends when he decides to settle in San Francisco.
Okay.
And starts working for Procter and Gamble over there in San Fran.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in San Francisco that he finally gets into his first foray into right-wing publishing and organizing.
Interesting.
And that first foray into organized politics is with a San Francisco-based group. This is 1952.
Okay.
Called Liberty and Property.
Okay. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God, they've come up recently.
Well, I mentioned it in the mid-arc roundup.
You mentioned it.
I mentioned it.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Because it is.
Man, so he's in San Francisco in 52.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, if he wasn't such an anti-CIA guy, that would be the place to be. You could be getting fucking MK Ultra right now. You could be like,
good point.
Sipping on funny party water in a research group at the university. He should have stuck with his studies.
Well, instead, he linked up. He joined a group run by a much older guy, named Aldrich Blake. And Liberty and Property, as the name implies, is like a libertarian group. No, you think that Liberty and Property, it must be National Socialist.
Yeah.
Although,
they had at least one guy.
Yeah. Well, in Carto's later life, he would kind of equate, he would make some theoretical leaps and bounds about how National Socialism is kind of philosophically the same as Jeffersonian populism or whatever.
Sure. All right.
And we'll get there. At this time, this is a libertarian group run by this guy named Aldrich Blake, who, when you look up his writings and what kind of stuff he was writing about, seemed to be pretty preoccupied with black people and the civil rights and desegregation and the like, or into those, kind of anti-civil rights movement shit, which, again, not surprising for a libertarian.
Yeah,
but Aldrich was. Go ahead.
Just to remind, when we covered Heinlein, coming from and also contributing to American libertarianism in a real way, had his own libertarian critique of integrating neighborhoods, right? Where he was like, it's not about being racist; it's a simple fact of whether or not we should let the state control our property values. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
it was this exact conversation.
Yeah.
But I imagine
that's
a very similar.
That's pretty much, I didn't read Aldrich Blake's entire things that he wrote, but I read some summaries. It's essentially that. Yeah. It's this libertarian argument against desegregation. And, so this guy is much older. Like I said, Carto's 26 or something now at this point. Mr. Blake is in his 60s, and he retires and passes down his organization to, into the hands of young Willis Carto.
I was about to say, Carto's hitting that crucial, crazy year of 27 when you just freak the fuck out for some reason, and he's getting it with whole organization dropped in his lap here.
Yeah, which is a useful thing if you have any kind of political ideas, especially at the time, and basically up until the era of the internet. Contact lists and mailing lists are so vital to the success of anything.
Site of so many battles, mailing lists broke apart a lot of Nazi organizations in this period.
I mean, this is what happens with a lot of Carto's organizations later on. Right. It's somebody passes on the mailing list of the fucking Holocaust revisionist group. Yeah. And then that gets in, you get into this legal battle and this whole thing. Yeah. So it's just like sharing data today. It's just like what large data companies do today. It's literally the same thing. These contacts are money. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is, this provides a pretty good base for Carto. I mean, Aldrich Blake had been around for a while. I guess he did have enough of whatever contact list.
A list.
Enough also for Carto to like. I think at this point he loses his job at Procter & Gamble. He starts doing other jobs or whatever, but this is kind of starts becoming more of his full-time job. And he starts traveling around again, visiting some contacts, making new ones, and using this network that he was handed to start up his own publication, which became really, really important in the 1950s right-wing scene.
Okay.
And since he's, I guess ever the imaginative guy, this new publication started in 1955 is called Right.
Just Right?
Right, the National Journal of Forward-Looking Americanism.
Huh.
But almost always just referred to as Right.
Okay.
So it's a right-wing publication called
Right.
Right. The guiding principles of this publication are Constitution, freedom, and nationalism.
Check, and check.
Yep.
We got him.
Yep.
Let's go. So this is an Americanist outfit for sure, like at the outset.
From the outset, but forward-looking Americanism. And I think that's crucial. And that is like where we should give him some credit. He had some success in it being the future of Americanism.
Oh God, you're right. In a horrible, horrible way.
In the most horrible way possible.
Do you think, though, can I ask you if it's possible that was maybe a reference to like Teddy Roosevelt era progressivism without having to use that word, which no longer meant that in the 50s?
So instead of being progressive Americanism, to be
like forward-looking
Americanism. That's an interesting point. Yeah, you may be right.
Because that word was kind of taken from them, you know what I mean? Like, it used to mean like fucking war and race science, and hippie bullshit, you know?
Yeah, come to think of it, you're probably right. You're almost certainly right about that. Yeah, and again, these are pretty like open-ended things, right? Americanism, we've talked about, can mean so many things. I think for him, it means whatever the fuck I want it to mean.
Well, that's usually what it means.
Yep. And
I mean, we're being a little loose about that. There are some unifying categories,
totally.
But essentially it's like listed in this organization's name almost, right? Like liberty, property, usually some kind of God type thing, but not necessarily. Yeah.
And Constitution, freedom, nationalism. Nationalism's the only like word there that with any particular meaning.
It's a little, and it's also a little bit European, maybe. You know, is this also part of this?
I think he's not
mixing
yet,
period.
He's not yet, I think, really influenced by more of the European stuff.
Okay,
let's get into Wright a little bit, actually.
Please. What did he write?
What did he write and write? So he initially published it under the pseudonym that he would use kind of throughout his life and career. One of the pseudonyms he used.
Oh, yeah.
But it's one that he kind of when he would write more controversial racist things, he would use one of his pseudonyms, which this one is E.L. Anderson, PhD. So of course,
boring pseudonym. Come on,
boring pseudonym,
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson.
It's literally a Matrix name.
It's a Matrix name, and he gave himself, of course, a PhD.
PhD. Come on. I mean, come on. Like, okay, this is where I think Ray would find a lot of satisfaction. He likes it when their entire psychological hangups are just laid bare like this. So
absolutely. And so, Wright actually doesn't exist for that long. It's founded in 1955, and it shuts its doors basically at the end of 1960. Okay. So it's only around for 5 years, but it leaves a pretty big mark because it did do what he did best, which is bring together all kinds of different elements of the post-war right wing into one publication, as well as kind of rehabilitating some of the older names. So, for example, they were kind of maybe not the first, but, one of the first major, right-wing publications to really start rehabilitating the legacy of like Lawrence Dennis, for example.
All right.
And this is, pretty soon after the war, right? This is 55.
All right.
Lawrence Dennis had kind of rough time then.
He'd gone through his trials. Yeah.
Right. And some of those other kind of older ones too. But so he's also bringing together everything from like the conspiracy theory, anti-fluoridation type anti-communists.
Yeah. Kind of JBS vibes.
Yeah, maybe. Like pre-JBS.
Pre-JBS.
But yeah, I mean, I guess contemporary to JBS.
Well, Lawrence Dennis was also very much into the fluoride conspiracy stuff. That was
it really
part
seems
of
like
that
they
period.
all were somehow.
Absolutely. It really triggered him. It set him off.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of like an anti-vax of the day, or I don't know.
Well, maybe it was like one of these Anglophile things. You know what I mean? That Anglo-American friendship where they wanted their teeth to sort of resemble the royal families or something.
Yeah. But then, they would also give space to like kind of more mainstream Cold Warriors and the like. And Wright's trajectory in those 5 years kind of got increasingly more like overtly Nazi than in the kind of early days. But like also very important for this time period is and how they also kind of became so influential on this post-war period is funneling anti-Semitism through critiques of Zionism and the relatively newly founded state of Israel.
Right, which would become very thematic throughout the 60s and early 70s for a lot of the groups that would extend out of Willis Carto.
Exactly. Because, they knew that, like, the overt anti-Semitism of, like, Coughlin and, the pre-war period was a little bit, passe.
Well, I guess Carto knew it, right?
Carto knew
like,
a
lot of his friends didn't.
No, his friends didn't. Carto knew that, like, to dad playing bridge with his friends in Fort Wayne, if you were like, Hitler was right, and
right, yeah,
that's a little bit like, hey, man, slow down.
Exactly.
But Israel and the subsequent conflict would provide a lot of fuel for that. Now, of course, you get into this whole conversation about like anti-Zionism, and the Nazi conception of that is very different. I think we could. Than, like, for example, some others, although they do overlap in a lot of ways. And, they did Right and Liberty Lobby would do things like platform certain anti-Zionist Jews that they could,
Yeah, of course.
Including, like, some of the crazy right-wing, like, religious anti-Zionists and the like.
Yeah. They really knew how to take advantage of kind of any mess that would come along too, but especially where they could march alongside, let's say, leftist protesters.
Yeah,
at least this has become later, I imagine. But maybe I'm talking a little bit out of turn here, but I'm just sort of thinking.
That would be a lot later, and they would absolutely do stuff pattern. Like that too. But
so it kind of starts here in this initial setting up of a narrative that includes kind of token anti-Zionist Jewish voices that allow them to piggyback their own anti-Semitic message through. Right.
And so like at this time, the anti-Zionist critique that they're trying to like push is an anti-communist one, essentially. It's that, the USSR was important in the foundation of Israel, and the kind of leftist Zionism that was like, existed in Israel at the time. And then, even later when the USSR splits and stops supporting Israel, they still see that as an indication that it's all part of the same Zionist communist conspiracy, right? That they're trying to like deceive us or whatever, but it's all part of the same kind of Judeo-communist plot. That's the kind of anti-Zionism that they're promoting at this time is rooted in this kind of anti-communism that was popular, obviously, in the 1950s, and that you could, get a lot of legitimacy with. Now,
look, I mean, it was like a huge bubble that was inflated all at once after the war, and it just got filled in with every fucking psycho from every walk of life and class that you can imagine in America. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like and to
that effect, they have, for example, like some of the Jews that they supported in the U.S. The names are escaping me now. I think they were in Frank Mintz's book. Are these kind of American Jewish libertarian anti-communist types?
Sure.
So people that were kind of comfortable already in those circles known in those circles and could be, shown as, good Jews that aren't part of. See, they're not all part of the communist plot. Some of them are patriots and libertarians,
and also say, "Look, we are not anti-Semitic." Like,
exactly, that was the whole
Jewish
point of trotting them out. Yeah. Now, of course, this gets a little bit more complicated later on, but this is because they start obviously platforming more and more and more like outward Nazis. But this is something that that Carto does throughout his very long career, and
you mean this kind of
tokenism, and not just with Jews, but for example, with Black people as well. So obviously, Wright dedicates a lot of time writing about the perils of desegregation against the civil rights movement. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, they did give a lot of space in the paper for Black nationalism. So they would, for example, hold up certain examples of, like, for example, Garveyite groups, Marcus Garvey himself, and like the Back to Africa movement as positive examples of, Black self-organization. And we're, very much advocates, as you might imagine, of Black people moving to Africa. And in the same token, they give a lot of positive space to Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam at the time too. Mm-hmm. So they're really kind of ahead of the game on that.
And it carries through.
Yeah.
As well into organizations and writers later on. I mean, I immediately thought of that horrible book we read, M.A.R. Barker's Serpent's Walk,
right?
That he wrote while he was writing for the Journal of Historical Review.
Yeah, which is
Carto's eventual journal, and that featured exactly this sort of course, caricaturized version of Go to Africa, Return to Africa Black nationalist sort of militant figure.
Yeah.
That they got along with, that his like Nazi group got along with in the book, Oh
yeah, I mean even like later Liberty Lobby, God, what's that guy's name? I can't remember. They had a token Black member as well in their board. His Robert Brock, who was for some time part of like one of their boards, who was like a big advocate of reparations, for example. Which, they disagreed with him on that. But, he was also, I guess, pretty anti-Semitic and whatever. So they got along on this, on that level. And, Carto would do things like invite, like, Black comedians to their events or musicians. They had no problem with, like, as most white people do, have no problem with Black people being their entertainers. But, like...
Because that's a prescribed space. Like that's,
right, exactly.
That's part of the order, so it's fine, yeah.
So, like one of the movements that they hold out, like I said, there are lots of Garveyite groups, but one of them is, for example, the Peace Movement of Ethiopia, which I mentioned back in the Fear of the Black Dragon episode. That was one of the kind of pro-Japanese Black organizations that then got accused of being an instrument of Japanese intelligence and the Order of the Black Dragon or whatever. So, like, this is... In the 50s, they're saying like these guys were good. These are the kind of like positive, movements that Black people have in America. In America, they defended the Nation of Islam or Elijah Muhammad's anti-interventionist position during World War II, and said that they were right. Black people didn't have anything to gain from being part of the war effort, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
But at the same time, they're publishing a lot of, these scientific racist ideas. Like, for example, of Charles Lee Smith. That's kind of an interesting side note that I wanted to make here about the other kind of important important publication in this like 1950s period. in the right wing, and that's the very old American periodical, The Truth Seeker, which was
why does that ring a bell? Yeah,
because it still exists today. It was founded in 1873 as a prominent like free thought journal. On the Wikipedia, it says Truth Seeker is the world's oldest free thought publication, one of the oldest periodicals in America. Among general readership titles, only Harper's Magazine, The Atlantic, Scientific American, and The Nation are older. But in this time period, and you can see this also in the Wikipedia, past racism. Starting in the 1950s, the Truth Seeker started publishing explicitly racist content under the editorship of Charles Lee Smith, beginning in 1937. Smith, Wolseley, Teller, and their successor, James Harvey Johnson, championed anti-Semitism, scientific racism, and white supremacy. So, like in the 50s, this, alongside Wright, was some of the kind of major voices in the right-wing publishing, like explicitly, racist shit with a considerably large readership. And so, Wright is publishing articles by Charles Lee Smith, and they're very much kind of working together with many of the writers at Truth Seeker and the editors. Under his pseudonym E.L. Anderson, Carto himself was writing racist articles in Wright about typical kind of stuff, how mongrelization brought down the great civilizations of the world. Very traditional American racist stuff that you see from eugenicists, but also from guys like Ben Klassen later on, right? They're republishing works by all of the greatest hits of Madison Grant and Lothrop Stoddard, but then they're keeping in touch with contemporary scientific racism in works such as Dr. Audrey Shuey's 1958, The Testing of Negro Intelligence. Okay. So they're very much also on the cutting edge of what's going on in race science in the 1950s. So, this is this kind of...
they like having people with titles around, obviously. They like having this, this vibe,
So, they're giving space to, Black nationalist perspectives, at the same time, also obviously writing,
keeping eugenics going.
Keeping eugenics going. Carto himself is writing racist articles, race science bullshit. But in order to be consistent, for example, they were against Hawaiian statehood under kind of racial grounds. Alaska as well. They were opposed to statehood for both Alaska and Hawaii. Hawaii, for obvious reasons, not.
To be fair, this was before HUAC sent John Wayne to clean up Hawaii.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So...
Or actually right around that time, no?
Right around that time, actually.
This is that time, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't think they necessarily had a lot of faith in John Wayne's ability.
Big Bill McLean?
Big Bill McLean, I guess, didn't do it for them. Although John Wayne was a subscriber to the Liberty Lobby newspaper, a long time. I was
wondering, since Wright was based out of California anyway, I wonder if he was also...
Yeah, I don't know if he was a subscriber to Wright. He was definitely a subscriber to the Liberty Lobby's paper. But, it wouldn't surprise me if he was into Wright, too. Wright had a pretty decent circulation at the time as well.
Sure.
Also staying kind of true to their isolationism, anti-imperialism. They supported Puerto Rican independence, for example. And even gave space to write articles about decolonization in Africa as being a potentially good thing. Obviously, I think with the exception of South Africa and probably later Rhodesia, because there wasn't no Rhodesia yet. But
But generally, it's just because they are playing now very explicitly with the idea of nationalism as their key concept. So they are going to feature other nationalist groups that are now in the papers that are popular.
But again, they have kind of a contradictory position on this because in some articles are in favor of decolonization in Africa. Carto himself had a very anti-British streak in him. which kind of unites him with LaRouche later on. And guys like Revelo, that they see the British, like the British Empire as like as one of the great evils that's controlled by like the Rothschilds and the Jews or whatever.
Yeah, and this, exactly. Yeah,
but at the same time, there's also articles coming out that are saying that like Black people, Africans are incapable of running like complex societies and et cetera, et cetera. So like kind of decolonization might be good, but also like they can't have proper states on like our level or whatever. That kind of racist bullshit.
It's just the most roundabout way of saying fuck off.
Yeah,
like like they're happy to support anybody who is saying we need let's say nationally founded new homelands for everybody. We need to separate. Of course, they're going to be following through all that, even if that stuff all reads left, right?
Yeah.
Because for them, it doesn't really matter. The point is they're separatists, and they're also probably quite happy, given what you told me about Carto, to like frame it as a political solution, right? Mm-hmm. Something that just requires diplomacy rather than framing it as like a civil war or something.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Yeah. Uh-huh. And I think that he also had like from his experience in the Philippines, this idea that like, the Filipino population was pretty supportive of like the American presence there, and that like, independence for the Philippines was probably, held out to him as like an example of like the way to do it kind of. Mm-hmm. Like they'll like us, the way they get independence, and everybody can live happily ever after.
Right.
So then like, since Wright's bringing together all these people, he's initially quite supportive of William F. Buckley and the foundation of the National Review. They wrote kind of positive things about Buckley and the National Review in this time period. They would later have like a kind of pretty famous,
a pretty big split that happened.
Pretty famous beef there. But like I said, they're also, praising Lawrence Dennis and doing all this other kind of stuff. But so they're also, in the early 50s or in the mid 50s, late 50s, publishing George Lincoln Rockwell before it was cool to do so. So like pre-AMP Rockwell was getting space there. They're defending
the deep cuts. Those are the tapes.
They're defending the National States Rights Party. They're publishing articles by Matt Cale, by Edward Fields.
Sure. Okay.
Wright even is host to some kind of early Christian identity writings as well, by kind of some more obscure Christian identity people. And so, like, I mean, again, in these 5 years, between 55 and 60, they're publishing a lot of guys that are become pretty important, ideas that become pretty important later on. What I mean?
Wild. Yeah. They have kind of a curating role, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, like he's really there with everybody. I mean, Carto's close to that British racist anthropologist, Roger Pearson.
Got to narrow that down. Okay.
Dr. Roger Pearson of the Northern League. This is somebody who's writing a lot in Wright as well, and who Carto's quite close to.
For that.
Yeah. And it's in these years that he gets in touch with Savitri Devi. And even republishes some of her works. I mean, everybody's here.
Okay. Is he probably? I guess he might be. Given what we know about the genealogy to follow, I suppose it's probably through Carto that Savitri Devi becomes so important to things like the ANP and the National Alliance and stuff as well, huh?
Yeah, probably. I'd imagine that it helped her get out to a broader kind of right-wing American audience. A lot, yeah, for sure.
Was he like an esotericist himself, or is he just sort of like willing to get all these voices together, and that's mostly what he's about?
I think he's willing to get voices together. I think he's not, from what I understand, ever was particularly religious.
He seems too plain. He's too middle class, too country club for it,
Yeah, I think this is where he also gets a lot of... He's like philosophically a Yachian, and we'll get into that pretty soon.
Okay. I mean, that's its own kind of crazy.
And I think that's his own kind. And so I think he has this kind of broader kind of philosophical conception of like Christianity, like and like Christian society. He's not with Yaki in that kind of like total rejection of that. But like he understands. I think he's like basically a secular Christian, from what I understand. And he's not like a Christian identity guy, but like he understands the value of that existing in this kind of world of Nazis. And
he might just like Yaki,
but also Savitri Devi too. He's like open, right? He's open to all of it, you know.
Yeah, I guess what puts all these things together, besides them all being like Nazi crazy shit, is that they sort of turn the democratic kind of liberal consensus on its head with regard to the post-war period, right?
Yeah.
So like he probably likes Yaki principally. I'm just throwing this out there. I'm spitballing, but like I would imagine what probably first attracted him to Yaki was Yaki's like revision of the Nuremberg trials. You know, his sort of
I think so.
Because that kind of stuff was very appealing also to Revelo and to this whole crew that eventually they would all run together in.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other interesting figures that come up in Wright that I think we'll dedicate. Maybe I'd like to dedicate some specific episodes to of some works that like are important to Carto's worldview and to the worldview of like post-war Nazis from like the immediate post-war period.
It's wild at this point in the podcast when we are reading over these guys now, you know, that were in the periphery before. And realizing that, he's the guy that started that, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, that's his phrase. That's where that begins. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah. So like, you know, there are some publications. I think we're going to do maybe specific episodes on like guys like John Owen Beatty, these books like Iron Curtain Over America, Somewhere South of Suez and stuff like that are really like important, but very at this point obscure texts from like the, you know, late 40s and early 50s that were like very instrumental to people like Carto and to people at that time period, but that are forgotten about now, that are talked a lot about in publications such as Wright, you know, and early Liberty Lobby.
Good.
But Wright runs out of steam by 1960. Like I said, it was kind of getting more progressively outward in its like racism and pro-Nazi shit. I think that he became frustrated that like, you know, he couldn't get daddy's bridge and golf club friends to become Nazis yet. And he kind of burns out like he does over and over again.
Yep.
And kind of ends that project and decides to focus his attention on something that he thinks will actually finally have an effect on politics, and that's the Liberty Lobby. But before we get to Liberty Lobby, we should mention the thinker that obviously had the most profound impact on Carto, and that's our old pal, Francis Parker Yaki.
I wanted to say yay, but I couldn't. My soul wouldn't let me.
Right?
It just bummed me out. That's all it did.
It's not really clear when Carto first read Yaki or first discovered Yaki. But I
imagine it was at a sleepover party with Revelo, and they were both like kicking their feet up.
You know, this is maybe before he knows Revelo, no? Because Revelo comes kind of after his period in the John Birch Society, no?
Well, so that's all kind of contemporaneous and in the future, but you're right. Revelo at this point is still just trying to be a professor, I think.
And I misspoke in the last episode, too.
Hit us.
Carto did have a direct connection to the John Birch Society in that he was a member. When it first started, but got out of it like really quickly.
Okay, so there still are.
So he was like briefly a member.
I see. Well, him and everybody else.
But you know, I think what's interesting with Carto and Yaki is that there's a few interesting things, but Carto is probably one of the main reasons that Yaki is even known in the U.S. today. Okay. Because he establishes contact with Yaki. In fact, what's interesting is that aside from his lawyer and the people in the jail, Yaki was probably the last outsider to see Yaki alive. So 6 days before Yaki kills himself in his jail cell in San Francisco.
You'll sleep all night, won't you?
Yes. Carto visits Yaki in jail, and that's the only time they meet, but he conducts an interview with him. And there are these conspiracies out there that it was Carto who smuggled in the cyanide capsule for Yaki.
Interesting.
That they had maybe correspondence before that. They had arranged for that
I think I remember
happen.
we talked about this a bit way back. In
way back.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had this this connection, like actual connection to Yaki, was the last guy to see him alive. And of course, when Yaki does off himself, Yaki gets a front page posthumous celebration of his life and work on Right, with his picture and everything, and talk about they lost a great thinker, the greatest thinker. And it's been a while since we talked about Yaki, and we might have some new listeners who maybe haven't listened to those episodes or aren't familiar with it. Do you think you could give a very brief summary of Imperium's of Imperium?
Yeah, I could actually, because, and listeners, we just medically recommend that you go back to the Yak block if you want to fully comprehend what we're talking about here and the enormity of the stupidity of becoming a Yakian, and like what that really means on a deep level.
If this dude is your greatest thinker and the most influential philosopher in your life, that kind of shows you where you're
trouble.
At.
Yeah, exactly. So, but Imperium is his major, most important work, and the one that appears most prominently on the backdrop of YouTube bookshelves of neo-Nazis on the internet, because it's hefty and it says Imperium, but inside is a what is supposed to be a sequel to Spengler's Decline of the West, that gives it a fun little twist. Well, two twists. One of the twists is, unlike in Spengler's telling, where every civilization has its historical cycle that rises and falls, ultimately culminating in a Caesarian moment, a Kaiserian moment, which collapses the entire civilization, and on we go. Yaki didn't really like the ending, and said that it actually is possible that this Kaiser moment, this moment in civilization, will open up a new possibility. Why not? And twist one, twist two is that civilizations are born of an essentially supernatural, but also very much natural thing that he calls the organism, which gives every civilization its unique spiritual self. Something that Spengler didn't identify because he didn't know.
Right.
So, I mean, apart from that, it's a lot of terrible predictions. I mean, Yaki makes a prediction a minute in Imperium, and literally none of them came to pass. But that's their marks.
That's their marks. And so, I mean, there are things about Yaki that you would kind of, on a surface level, would think would be kind of contradictory to Carto's kind of patriotic, libertarian Americanist thing.
Oh, because of what we didn't say about Yaki, which is that he's very much styles himself a European fascist, but not only that, laid some of the groundwork for a nationalist Bolshevik perspective. He had this kind of he developed an affinity for the Soviet Union in the end of his career, which marks him as unique in that time.
Now, Carto will say that he doesn't have an affinity for the Soviet Union, but that he has an affinity for the Russian people, the vast majority of whom, and including some people in the Soviet government, recognize that they're being controlled by the world Jewish conspiracy that controls both communism and capitalism.
I see.
So his interpretation of Yaki's like kind of pro-Soviet ideas is that they're pro-Russian nationalist. And his interpretation of kind of Yaki's anti-Americanism is that Yaki is like, you don't get it, man. He's such a nationalist that, like, he's dispelling all the bad things, and like he understands nationalism on a like civilizational level that, like, your brain just can't comprehend, man. It's deep shit. This is the biggest book Carto ever read. It's the most important thing to him ever. So he tends to have kind of a more let's say, like, positive interpretation of Imperium, if that's possible.
Even more. So whereas Imperium was like the positive version, the optimistic version of Decline of the West, now Carto's given us an optimistic version of Imperium, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, they're so happy.
Yeah. And like these kind of long-winded explanations about like how National Socialism is the same as Jefferson or whatever, because it's like a fundamental... It's not like advocating necessarily a system of government, but a way of thinking.
And they're not going to make that FDR is National Socialist argument, I assume, right? Are they going to go with the FDR as a commie?
Actually, there's an interesting connection to FDR and Liberty Lobby that I'll get to soon.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean, this is Imperium is extremely important to Carto. Like I said, Wright immediately eulogizes Carto and starts republishing the shit, and then Wright goes away in 1960. And Liberty Lobby gets to work republishing Carto as well. Even the Free Thinker...
Republishing Carto or republishing Yaki?
Yaki, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Even the Truth Seeker or whatever, which kind of fundamentally disagrees with Yaki, also kind of picks up on Carto's Jock and the Yak and like republishes... Yaki's work. And so then, like, you know, and later with Liberty Lobby's press printing group, Noontide Press, starts publishing Imperium. And like I said, people say that he's probably, you know, most responsible for Imperium having a life after Yaki's death. The Noontide Press ones included a 30-page intro by Carto.
Okay. All right. Well, this all kind of comes together. I looked up my Revelo timeline, and he, in fact, does not get into Imperium or Yaki until after he meets Carto.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say that's Carto's
But I think Carto actually...
emissary.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, Carto doesn't publicly, I think, stand by Yaki until Yaki dies. So again, it's not really clear when he started really getting into Imperium, whether it was like, you know, a thing towards the end of Wright, he gets into it, meets Yaki dies, and then he becomes a Yakian, or whether he was kind of nurturing some of this Yakian thought for a little bit.
Or he saw a free IP lying around.
Yeah. And so he's a Yakian at this point, at least at which Wright ends and Liberty Lobby begins. Now, in the last episode, in the mid-arc, I said that Liberty Lobby was founded in 1958, the same year as the John Birch Society, and that is true according to some sources.
Oh, really? This is what I read this as well. 1958 was the...
But there are various ideas of when it actually started. Conceptually, it is thought to have started earlier. It was announced as an idea in 1957, I believe.
Okay. All right.
But then it's not actually formally, I think, incorporated, like as, Liberty Lobby Incorporated until 1960.
Oh, so it was an official lobby. Like it was an official lobby.
Yeah. And it became that in the 1961 or 1962 or something like that. So this is from an issue of Wright kind of proclaiming the Liberty Lobby, or the need for a Liberty Lobby.
I don't think it's pronounced Liberty Lobby.
Liberty Lobby. The entire system needs to be thrown out and a truly libertarian system reestablished, which will be in the interests of all the people, not just some. The Augean stables need to be cleaned. A second American Revolution is needed, but this presents many problems. The main one being simply that our side is not yet nearly strong enough nor well organized enough. Such a strategy requires the establishment of a beachhead on the battleground of Washington. An actual office must be set up, ready, willing, and able to lock horns with the minority special interest pressure groups. The lobby will work in the top, right at the seat of federal power, while the grassroots groups will continue their essential work in the bottom, at the precinct and district level. Each type of operation will benefit the other, and together they will be far stronger than alone. The Liberty Lobby will also bring northern and southern groups together for political action. This will pave the way for a long overdue formal coalition of conservative forces which is so desperately needed.
Okay. Damn. Yeah. Very explicit and exactly what they did. Huh?
Yeah. And so, whether we say the foundation date is 57 when this was announced, or 58 when he first starts getting together, it is picking up. It's doing what Right can't do, right? It's to become an actual DC-based lobbying group that can influence the political system. So Carto spent quite a lot of time using the network he already had through Rights, through Liberty and Property before that, to fundraise and generally get the idea out there. And although he didn't meet his goal for the amount of money that he initially wanted, he was still able to raise enough that to secure a large office. In fact, I think a whole building on Capitol Hill in DC, like 3 blocks away from like the Capitol building. And I'm going to again quote the book real quick. And this is not a quote by Carto, but it just gives you an example of how this is looking. After its inception, Liberty Lobby grew substantially. Originally, the organization had about 2,000 supporters who subscribed to its newsletter. By March 1965, Liberty Lobby claimed that the figure had reached 100,000, and then 3 months later, 125,000, and by 1970, this figure reportedly climbed to 250,000.
Blowing up.
At first, there were only 2 unpaid employees, but by 1969, there were 42 paid employees, of whom 37 were full-time. So
let me just remind everybody that this is like a fucking Nazi group.
Yeah, this is a Nazi
group.
This is absolutely a Nazi group
with an office in Washington and 42 goddamn employees.
Yeah,
that's fucking crazy.
On Capitol Hill, around the corner,
that's fucking crazy.
From the Capitol. They're doing their work.
They're doing it.
And so Willis Carto is in charge of the organization, but they have kind of a rubber stamp board of directors, which is called the Board of Policy. They have a couple other kind of boards.
The Politburo.
Yeah, they're Politburo. And the first chairman of this Board of Policy, mentioning FDR, is an interesting guy by the name of Colonel Curtis B. Dahl. Former son-in-law of FDR, turned right-wing anti-Semite.
Is the B for Bean? Yes, it is. Curtis Bean Dahl. Yeah.
Yeah. So he has Bean and dal, the Indian lentil dish, in his name.
I am a little hungry, actually. After
I know, right?
Curtis, I could do some bean dal right now.
Yeah. Curtis Bean Dahl is, like I said, this former son-in-law of FDR who wrote a book that became relatively famous in right-wing circles called FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law.
Yeah, because I see here he married Anna Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes.
Daughter of FDR and Eleanor. Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. And this guy became like a fascist, huh?
Yeah, so why is his father-in-law exploited? That's kind of an interesting term to use. Yeah. My understanding, I haven't read the book, but my understanding of why that is that FDR was being controlled by malicious forces that were, outside of his control. Namely kind of like the Jews, basically. So yeah, that's interesting guy. He becomes, I think he's like a lifelong Liberty Lobby member. Later on, what's his face? Carto's book that I have is dedicated to Dahl. And that one that was like published in the 80s or 90s. The one that's kind of outlining his political philosophy that he turns into a political party in the 80s, but that
I see that out of Texas or something, right?
We'll get to that in the next episode. But that book is dedicated to Dahl.
Wild. Just a biographical note, if anybody was wondering. By the time FDR was president, I think Anna Eleanor dumped him already.
Oh yeah. They had divorced at this point. Yeah. Because this is like anti-FDR stuff. I think from even maybe like during the war.
And it was the first White House divorce. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
yeah, this is a direct connection to FDR. Funny. So picking up
she immediately married Colin Jordan. after being dumped by Dior. I'm kidding. None of that happened.
I was like, wait,
it's totally different.
Joking?
I am.
Okay. So yeah, that's the first chairman of the Board of Policy. Picking up where Wright left off, since Wright, closed in 1960, Liberty Lobby had its own publication called Liberty Letter. Their publishing house, Noontide Press. Liberty Letter, later there would be other, Liberty Lobby lasted a long time. There'd be other publications as well.
You just said Liberty Letter later, and then you said Liberty Lobby lasted a long time. You're just hitting these
tongue twisters.
Yeah, I'd be stumbling all the way through the last sentence you just said. Good job.
Liberty Letter. There was also Liberty Lowdown.
Oh damn.
Yeah, the Liberty Ledger, Liberty Lowdown. I like
they want me to fuck up all these names. They're asking for it.
Liberty Letter, Liberty Lobby, Liberty Lobby's Liberty Letter later.
Launched Liberty Ledger.
Launched Liberty Ledger.
Yes.
All right, now say that 10 times fast.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so like I said before, by the mid 60s, it has a circulation of over 200,000, which puts it above other contemporary mainstream conservative publications like the National Review, which has a much smaller circulation at that point. Again, these are Nazis.
Yeah, that's fucking wild. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah.
Willis is moving, really.
Willis is moving. So during the 1960s, Liberty Lobby's doing, focusing its political work on, lobbying efforts against, Kennedy, LBJ, supporting Barry Goldwater in 64.
Okay.
Obviously, opposed to issues such as civil rights. Why do you think that is, Fritz?
Well, because of the racism, I would guess.
No. They're not racist.
Communism?
Civil rights, desegregation, the Jews, and through the communists controlling the blacks, and Martin Luther King is a puppet of Israel and the communists.
The American Communist Liberties Union.
Yeah, exactly. You get the idea.
I know it. I'm with you now. Let's go.
So then, foreign policy, Liberty Lobby has its own national security board. With a bunch of kooky ex-military officers, namely U.S. Marine Corps General Pedro de Valle.
Nice.
Who we just talked about.
Yeah.
And then, of course, on this Foreign Policy Advisory Committee is our favorite Revelo Palindrome Oliver.
That's right. Yes. Political race car.
They're all here now. So they're, also campaigning against any kind of nuclear weapons regulations and treaties.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They got some kooky ex-general, just fucking the Soviets are going to attack from space. And
Heinlein definitely liked these guys. I'm gonna go back before I go on the other show with Seti and figure that out. This is his people.
This is exactly his people. He had to have been a subscriber to Liberty Letter or to Wright or to something. I mean, this seems totally up his alley.
Yeah.
Especially now with this foreign policy shit, no?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was 100. Heinlein was all about nuking everyone and starting a libertarian moon colony.
Yeah, exactly. I think these are his people.
Yes.
Now, the issue of Vietnam, like I said, it gets a little bit hairy here because, if they were to stay true to their isolationist principles, they would be against the war. But on the anti-communist thing,
it's tricky.
It's tricky. I mean, Birchers had this problem as well, right? And there were differing opinions there. Carto seems, so the idea was that he was against the war fundamentally, but since they were in it, they had to win it. That kind of thing. Okay. They couldn't suffer humiliation, and if they had to defeat the communists is always kind of a good thing. I guess later in his life, he would say that this is a mistake. They should have actually been against the war the whole time, but they weren't. So they were kind of win it. If we're already in it, we got to do it.
Yeah.
as you might imagine, they were vehemently opposed to any support for Israel on like a fundamental level.
They were anti-communists.
Because they're anti-communists. Well, because they're anti-Semites. And the Jews control
of course,
all
but I mean,
finance.
at least rhetorically.
Yes. Rhetorically, they're anti-Zionists. And significant segments of Liberty Lobby were advocating and continued to advocate far after this, after when this became very unpopular to do so, building alliances and good relationships in the Muslim world.
Interesting.
Creating like a united front against Israel. So this is where in my brain, because they did have connections to the World Muslim Union that,
Where
Carto's meeting Muftich and they're hypnotizing people together.
Dude, he's so busy though. Muftich is like handling blood bags right now, Maybe he wrote an article for
they're reading Jafet Kulana, which is, what is it? The Muslims in whatever Yugoslavia thing, the anti-communist text of his. Yeah. So, Liberty Lobby kind of starts off with a bang, right? Yeah. Carto becomes an important figure in the American right-wing scene pretty much as soon as he starts, because he inherits liberty and property and starts.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, he knows the value of a mailing list.
He absolutely understands the value of a mailing list. He understands the value of the printed word.
That's right.
I think he was like a paper boy as a kid too, but
I played that game. Classic. NES.
Is that the one where you have to like kill a dog or something in the very beginning?
You don't have to. Do you? I think you'd have to throw a paper at a dog until it dies.
You have to shoot anti-violent video game protesters, and I remember that part of the game.
Oh my God, you're right.
Yeah. That's an old game. It's an old fucked up game.
I know what I'm doing tonight.
Oh, damn. All right.
Shooting papers at fucking anti-violence protesters.
Carto, gets the ball rolling. I mean, he gets frustrated with the direction of right, but, he discovers Yaqui. That gives him a philosophical imperative to move forward.
Yeah.
And he puts all of his energy into Liberty Lobby, the only group of his that would remain under his control pretty much until it dies out because of lawsuits in 2001. But, so
long time.
Yeah, long time. And we're going to cover all the rest of that in the next episode. So we basically just got through the founding in the late 50s. And then, the kind of general activities in the 60s and the structure that they established. Now, 68 famously is the candidacy of a certain fellow by the name of George Wallace, who we have talked about before. The kind of, when people say that American politics are fucked up now.
Yes. George Wallace had a shot. And we just talked about him in the last episode too. His speechwriter was Asa Carter, the out and out Klansman. Uniting European fascism with the KKK into a.
So as you can imagine, the folks over at Liberty Lobby were quite enthusiastic about George Wallace's candidacy. And Willis Carto was disturbed by what he saw going on the college campuses these days.
Oh, sure.
These long hairs, smoking dope and commies, and that. And if only there was a youth organization that could counter them on the college campuses and support good politics.
We called it Turning Point USA. Right?
No. They called it Youth for Wallace.
Yes.
Very creative, as he is with names. Youth for Wallace might be familiar to you if you remember our William Luther Pierce episodes.
Yeah.
But that is another Carto organization that spins out of his control, eventually becoming the famous National Alliance run by William Luther Pierce. And that's where we're going to leave off for today. And we're going to pick up at the National or at the Youth for Wallace.
Youth for Wallace
next week.
Yeah, as I recall, that was also kind of at the towards the end of the Wallace campaign. And,
I mean, it's Youth
maybe
for Wallace.
Was like a way to get another mailing list. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Get those names. Because like it doesn't really pick up until like 69, 70.
Yeah. It wasn't like
because William Luther Pierce doesn't get really control of it until like 71, I think.
Right.
I'm a little fuzzy on the numbers at the moment. I don't have it in front of me.
I think you got it actually. I think you might have nailed it there.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but yeah.
It's been a while, yeah.
All right. So Willis Carto, finally, we got several gray eminences these days, don't we?
Yeah.
We're just doing one after the other. Yeah. All these guys were the inspiration of all the guys that we talked about back in Arc 3.
Yeah. Or if not the inspiration, the
meat and potatoes.
Organizer in Carto's case. He's not inspiring much.
But he's organizing. I guess I could say the progenitors.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And it's hard to square this guy away with like esoteric Hitlerism and Kale and Savitri Devi and this vibe. He doesn't fit that.
Yeah,
like, everybody should look at his picture right now if you can.
I mean, I guess we can post it with the app.
Yeah, I'll post it up on the Patreon at least. But yeah, for all you free listeners out there, we'll go to our Patreon. There you go.
Or just look him up. There's plenty of pictures of him.
No. Yeah,
for a while.
Go to the Patreon. Go to the Patreon. Don't listen to Boris.
Yeah. Go to the Patreon. Become a patron. Subscribe.
There we go. Yes. All right. Well, I look forward kind of to hearing how this goes. I imagine we got another couple episodes ahead of us probably, huh?
Yeah, at least one. I don't want to spend more than one more episode on him. I think we can...
you know what? I feel what you're saying.
We can cover the big things here. It starts to get into a lot of like litigation and crazy shit. And
Yeah. That stuff can be summed up pretty fast. And not only that, but it's not like you're going to get anything that new out of the writings in the 80s. You might, an interesting change here and there that has to do with global politics and probably presidential runs. And I'm curious to know about how Reagan fits into any of this.
Yeah.
But I guess all that's later.
9/11 and stuff too.
Yeah. But overall, your fundamental message is not going to change for the
not
decades.
Really, no.
It gets pretty repetitive.
Yeah.
You can basically guess what they're going to say about almost everything. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, we don't have to give.
But we'll go through like his major organizations, and maybe one of his books, or just kind of glance through it because it's shitty.
All right, guys.
All right.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.
See you soon.
Bye. Hey there, all you free people enjoying your free episodes from The Empire Never Ended. Maybe scoot on over to patreon.com/tenepod and become a patron. We publish 3 additional premium episodes there alongside the 2 freebies each month. We're on Twitter too, also at Tenepod, but our Patreon is really where it's at. See you there, maybe? Yeah?